Hello, and a very warm welcome to our distinguished speakers and guests for the second edition of our virtual policy dialogue series, which looks to delve into how trade policies can shape regional supply chains and catalyze domestic renewable energy manufacturing across Africa. Now, it goes without saying that globally, there has been a concerted effort to meet net zero commitments and transition to more sustainable low carbon energy systems. Despite energy access deficits, African countries have also put commitments to action by developing ambitious energy transition and green growth plans. What we're also seeing is that, in addition to articulating their net zero targets, key underpinning fundamentals such as economic development, job creation, and industrialization are paramount, as African leaders are keen to ensure that energy transition also brings about a new age of prosperity across the continent. Given significant regional demand and abundant natural resources, opportunities are abound to reduce import dependency, build local industries, and ensure that African countries play a major role in the renewable energy technology supply chain. When we speak of enabling conditions to support the scale-up of renewable energy manufacturing in Africa, the lack of access to finance tends to top the list. However, as a key enabler, trade and regional policies are increasingly being highlighted as fundamental levers for attracting long-term investments into domestic manufacturing of energy transition solutions. As we kickstart our webinar, we will look into how trade policies need to be designed to support the development of the renewable energy manufacturing sector in Africa, with a focus on solar PV, batteries, and electric vehicles. We are honored to have a diverse and dynamic set of speakers who will no doubt share their valuable insights on actions needed to strengthen trade policy frameworks and facilitate the development of renewable energy supply chains in Africa. My name is Lola Abiola. I'm a program manager at Sustainable Energy for All and also lead the Africa Renewable Energy Manufacturing Initiatives. Please feel free to pose any questions you have in the Q&A section of the chat. And without further ado, I will now hand over to Mr. Clovis Pierre, who is chief of the Commodity Research and Analysis section at UN Trade and Development, to deliver his scene-setting remarks.
Thank you very much, Lolita. Let me just share my quick presentation that I'll be using when I give this brief introduction. Thank you very much for the invitation. It's a pleasure to be here and honored to ANCTA to be part of this discussion. So what I was asked to do was to set the stage on this topic of how trade policies can shape regional renewable energy supply chain and catalyze domestic manufacturing in Africa. So I would like to start just pointing out why it's important to do that. Of course, Africa, there is a big deficit on energy, so of course you have to increase that, but also I would like to bring another aspect, is that what we see in this graph we see two lines. One in the top is the GDP per capita of core countries. This is basically Western Europe, the US, Japan, Australia, New Zealand, and Canada. And these countries, you see their GDP per capita increasing over time since the Industrial Revolution. And the other line, the blue line, is the GDP per capita of all other countries. And you see that with every technological revolution, the distance between these two groups of countries only increased. And now we are in the beginning, many say, on the new technological revolution, where green technologies are part of that revolution. It's together with the digital and green technologies. So this intertwined or twin revolution is here, and it's important that countries catch this revolution at the beginning and don't miss this opportunity. So it's a big opportunity in terms of what the market side of these green technologies can offer. We have studies that show that some estimates of $9.5 trillion on these twin digital and green technologies. And so it's a big potential of for countries there. But and trade has expanding quite a lot, significantly actually. And here you see some numbers related to solar PV, both in terms of exporters, but also import, and how this is growing over time. But the thing is that so far developed economies is really the ones that were able to get more out of this opportunity. So to give an idea, this graph on the left, it shows that the export of green technologies, and here we have solar PV, wind, you have, but also electric vehicles and so on. In developed countries, they increased from 60 billion in 2018 to 156 billion, almost 3 times in 2021. At the same time, developing countries, including China, it increased also at the same time, but not as much, going only to 75 billion compared with 156 billion. And you see that in the case of electric vehicles, for example, the export is dominated by developed countries and China. So you don't see the other developing countries there. What we know is that developing countries, they do have quite a lot of the minerals that are used for those technologies and called critical energy transition minerals. And here we see some of them: copper, cobalt, nickel, lithium, and so on. And the technologies where they're used there. And I highlighted for the EV, electric vehicles and battery storage, where we need quite a lot of them. And in Africa, there's a lot of those metals that are used for electrical vehicles. Actually, it's considered that you have 20% of all sources of the minerals used for electric vehicles, and some of them are listed here, like cobalt, 48% of reserves, manganese, 48% of reserves, graphite as well, 22%. So quite a lot of that. But what is this challenge? This challenge is how to escape this commodity dependence and be again developing countries exporting raw material and importing these manufactured products, these new technologies. And here, in showing this map, countries in the world that we are considered commodity dependent, that over 60% of the exports are commodities. And here you have in green dependent on agriculture, in orange mining, and energy in blue. But many countries, they do depend on more than one commodity. It's just the commodity type that is more influential on this dependence. So you see the whole Africa basically is a commodity dependent continent there. So how to escape that? Also, it's important to understand that I'm showing here the value chain from one of these minerals, lithium, that it's important for the electric batteries, for the electric vehicles, and all the way from lithium to the electric vehicle. You can do the same for other metals, like for minerals like cobalt and so on. And what we see here is that when we look at the value chain as a whole, there are many places there in the value chain that the countries can be part of this value chain, but where developing countries are usually concentrated in the upstream part of the value chain. And also it's usually the part of the value chain that will have a bigger concentration, or fewer countries participating on that. If I show that for the cobalt to you, you'll see the Democratic Republic of Congo at the upstream part there. But what we see is that in these value chains, the value of these exports, they increase downstream. So here in this example from lithium, you have extraction on the values of 21 billion, for example, but then when you go to cell components, battery packs, it's 109 billion exports, and for the electric vehicles, 129 billion. So you see it's increasing over when you pass in the value chain. So it's important for developing countries in Africa to really benefit and from that, and move from exporting the raw material to really moving down the downstream and adding value, and beyond only beneficiation of and processing of minerals, but really going into these other sectors that are required for these technologies. And beyond that, actually, this perspective should be on the structural transformation, combining this value chain with other value chains where the battery packs, they serve as inputs, for example, for the battery manufacturing of the automotive value chain, and then you have beneficiation of processing minerals going to chemicals, chemicals going for fertilizer, for example, for agri-food. So you have the interlinkage of these value chains, and not only within a country but within the region. So you can have this regional integration, fostering these interlinkages and this idea of diversification of countries through structural transformation. So what is the role of policy in doing that? We have studied several countries that went through this process of catching up on these technologies, of these green technologies, renewable technologies and green technologies. So we took a look on solar PV, on bioethanol, hydrogen, and so on. And we saw that if we consider countries have some initial conditions and countries can have some responses to the situation to foster those industries. Of course, countries that have strong conditions and strong response is the best scenario possible. And they have examples like solar PV, biomass in China, bioethanol in Brazil, and so on. But countries that don't have a strong condition, they have weak conditions at the beginning, but what we found is that they can compensate that with strong policy, strong effort. So countries that bring strong policies, they really can drive this transformation and catch up in terms of green technologies and manufacturing these technologies. And what is interesting for us to take in consideration when we see that is that the level of tradability of these elements of these value chains are important. So for example, if you take solar PV, you have the capital equipment and inputs, the solar panels, the components, all of that, those are part of that can be produced, can be manufactured. You have the energy for the generation of the energy generation technology used there. You have the output of that generation. So all of that you can consider as different products that can be that the country can enter into, and it's important to understand what is the level of tradability of that. If the tradability is very high, for example, solar panels, they have high tradability, so you would require a higher level of protection to foster an industrial infant industry in the country. In other technologies, there are lower level of tradability in some of these elements, what would require a lower level of protection trade because you have a natural protection for the low tradability of that technology or that component. So that's important for us to take in mind that the trade rules and the trade policies, they are very dependent on these sectors, on the technologies that we want to foster. When we look at countries and what kind of policies they have used, trade policies are part of the policy mix. Countries never use one only policy, so it's always a mix of policies, but we see many countries using local content requirements, favorable custom duties, export credit assistance. So the mix of these kind of policies seems to be very important, and we have cases, and we can go to some examples of that where countries have used a mix of those policies there. What we see these days very strongly in terms of trade agreements, and particularly in the case of critical energy transition minerals, is these agreements, access agreements for these for developed countries that want to access these in developing countries, but many countries in Africa. And what is important to take in consideration is that these agreements, they should go beyond the extraction and access to these critical minerals, and they really should be part of the core of these agreements, the structural transformation, diversification of the developing countries that are producing of these minerals, to be really part of this technological revolution and be able to produce these technologies as well. In terms of international cooperation, for regional cooperation, I believe we will be discussing quite a lot here, and of course, Africa with free trade area, you have the opportunities there for creating these regional value chains. But I would like to bring the quickly for the international cooperation. It's important for at the international level to bring this consistent and coherence among trade, intellectual property, and climate change agreements. We see sometimes that in the climate change agreement, in the Paris Agreement, in the discussions in COP, we have pointing to one direction where we have principles of common but differentiated responsibility. We have principles related to access to or rules related to access to technology for green technologies. But when you have the discussions on the trade, it seems to not be totally aligned. So we have to um, 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 encourage countries to really bring this alignment on this trade agenda and the climate agenda. So, and these sectors in developing countries will be infant industries, infant green industries that need to be fostered, and that need to be fostered with all kinds of policy instruments. And in terms of trade, that may require tariffs, may require subsidies, public procurement, local content requirements. So it has to be a dialogue on how to understand the application of these trade rules in the as tools for that ultimately will bring this energy transition, the sustainability that all countries would like to have. And in terms of intellectual property, also has to have a greater flexibility for developing countries in regards to these green technologies. Flexibilities that were used, for example, during the COVID for vaccines. It's also a common goal to have health and protect the health of the population globally. It is a common goal as well to move to energy transition. So the countries should move to a discussion of intellectual property that bring greater flexibility. So I think I covered quite a lot of ground here. I will stop now, and I really look forward to discussion and the panel contributions. Thank you very much.
Great. Thank you so much, Clovis. I think that was an exceptional starting point and scene setting for us. And also for laying out so clearly the aspect of the fact that as countries in Africa raise their ambitions for the energy transition, for scaling up solar deployment, or whether that's electric mobility or even energy storage, imports are rising. And there really is no other way for us to start thinking about how we link the energy transition with also goals for industrialization and structural transformation. What we don't want to do, as you also rightly pointed out, is replace one form of commodity dependence with another. And so that sort of interlinkages with structural transformations and how the different value chains can come together and link up is something that is crucial. And also laying out so clearly on the importance of industrial policy. It's a key area of focus now, not just for countries in the global south, but everywhere else as well. And if we look back at the history of how industries have developed, there has been a strong role of trade policies in supporting infant industries. And as we think about localizing value chains for renewable energy technologies in Africa, linking to critical minerals, going from extraction to processing, refining, and manufacturing, we really have to think about how those trade policies can be designed and rules can be designed to facilitate and foster that process. So thank you so much, Clovis, for really laying that out for us so clearly. Now we have a exceptional panel lined up for us today, and I'd love to invite now Dr. Fenwix Musonye, who's the Deputy Director at the Energy and Petroleum Regulatory Authority at Kenya, Mr. Loving Koranteng, who's the Chief Investment Officer at Solar Taxi in Ghana, Mr. Matthew Cullinan, who's the CEO of Atlantis Green Tech Special Economic Zone in South Africa, Dr. Soleimane Abdallah, who's at the Regional Integration and Trade Department at UNECA, Sylvia Mora, who's the Senior Associate at GreenMax Capital Advisors, and Teniola Tayo, who's a Trade Policy Fellow at the Africa Policy Research Institute. Requesting colleagues to, maybe we can pin each of the panelists on so we can see them as a block. So maybe starting with on the private sector side actually. So Mr. Loving Koranteng, Solar Taxi is one of the companies in Ghana that is at the forefront of the electric mobility revolution. If I understand right, it was among the first, if not the first company to receive a license to assemble electric vehicles locally. Ghana has also introduced a number of import duty incentives for electric vehicles for public transportations, but also semi knockdown kits and completely knockdown kits. But our question to you is, as from a private sector perspective, as Ghana looks to, support the local manufacturing of electric vehicles, how can trade policies, including tariff and non-tariff incentives, most effectively support the expansion of Ghana's e-mobility sector, focusing not just on the assembly, but also then moving upstream into component level manufacturing? Over to you, Loïc.
Thank you very much, and it's a pleasure to be here. Just to confirm if you can hear me.
Yes, we can hear you.
Right. As you mentioned, my name is Lavin. I lead the investment team at Solar Taxi, and rightly said, this year specifically, the government decided to include some incentives and policy direction to encourage and also incentivize companies that are trying to transition to electric vehicles. And proudly so, we were one of the early businesses and or startups to have a license to locally assemble electric vehicles. Yes, one of the challenges we've had, especially moving beyond Ghana and across the continent, has been how expensive for us to move our vehicles across the borders. For instance, we do export to our neighboring countries. We do export to Nigeria, Senegal, and Co. And one of the huge challenges has been the tariffs and issue regards to whether we should break down the components to locally assemble these vehicles in these countries, or we should just assemble them and transport them to these countries. But one thing has been very real to us, which has been it's very expensive to move product between Ghana and Nigeria, between Ghana and Togo, and between Ghana and Senegal, Cote d'Ivoire, and Co. Especially when you fully assemble them. And we've been trying engaging with some government officials in these countries to even set up localized assembly plants so that product that we import are shipped directly to these areas for us to be able to locally assemble. So I think one of the ways that we can encourage trade policy or being able to move product within the continent has to be the tariff issues, like I mentioned, very expensive to move product. Secondly, as well, I'm looking for localized financiers who are willing to work in partnership with some countries across Africa. We see that with importation of product from China, where it's easier to work with some localized financial institutions here or in China. But that is a bit tricky when you look at it from the African perspective. It's hard to do business across the continent, both in financing or capital allocation, and both in movement of product. And then also encouraging businesses that are doing well in other areas to also localize their assembly or to localize their production in these countries to one, foster collaboration, encourage employment, and then also to help bring down the costs for these individuals who are interested in purchasing this product. So for instance, it costs about 25% less for us to, for how we sell our products in Ghana as compared to Nigeria. And it could cost the same price if you could just have a well thought out policy direction to encourage the transition to green. And so I think this is what I would like to say about that.
Thank you, Loving, for bringing out different challenges that you face, and in particular the importance of facilitating intra-regional trade that helps local manufacturers to access larger markets. but also eventually reduce costs and use costs for the consumers themselves. Also for flagging sort of the role of local financing institutions, and we'll also discuss let's discuss that briefly later on in this discussion. But maybe if I could also sort of you know, ask you about some of the very specific practical challenges that you face. You know, let's say, for example, even if there are certain incentives or tariff incentives that exist, are there any specific challenges that you face in accessing those incentives that could be addressed and make it easier for intra-Africa trade or just importing the knockdown kits, for example?
Yes, I think I do agree with you. Even though this year, during the last reading of the budget for 2024, and government decided to remove the various taxes that we pay at the port for parts to assemble regards to electric vehicles. But as it stands now, that policy hasn't fully come into play in terms of when we are deciding to bring in products to assemble. So even though government has gone ahead to have mentioned to the general public that this is the direction they want to take, that hasn't fully come into fruition because it has to go through committees and approvals. Then afterwards, the agency that is responsible for that has to implement it. And we are 6 months already into the year, and all these layers of approvals haven't been fully realized yet. So even though we were very excited about the policy as we speak at the moment, and that hasn't fully come to light. And the same for even working with the automotive agency in Ghana, where there have been so much incentives as proposed by these agencies. But then if you decide to go ahead to realize these incentives, it is a challenge because the agencies are not really working together to make sure this is truly what is being implemented. But then for political score, that has been said in the media, that has been mentioned during parliamentary readings, and these excitements do come, but the realization takes a while. Sometimes it can take 12 to 18 months, even when the policy has been sort of shared or discussed in Parliament. So that's one of the issues we are facing, realization of policy. And also, we see a huge issue when it comes to policy implementation and change of government. And it happens a lot in Ghana. The government, when change, can walk back of policy, that is still in the process of being implemented. So, for instance, this year is an election year in Ghana, and regardless of where the tide would head, we may see issues in regards to, even though this policy has been shared, or this was what the government intention was from the beginning of the year, we may never ever have access to it because then it took so long for the implementation to happen. And then when there's a change of government, then that policy implementation never takes place. And so that is one of the challenges we face. And then there's also quite an amount of politics when it comes to even after implementation, getting access to it. So we see that a lot in Ghana, that government can have a tax waiver for a specific program or for a specific project or for a specific sector. And then you still see the implementers that are supposed to make sure this is realized. I'm still challenging you in terms of you truly getting access to it. So even as government has said this, you still need to apply for it with these agencies. So that agency for tax waiver, let's say Ghana Revenue Authority. Even after that, you have to still apply to them. And now it's taking almost a year for government approval to get implemented. Now, after implemented, you can send them an application and it can take another 12 months for it to be fully accepted, for you to now start realizing these incentives. So even though as part of the framework or as part of government focus in terms of incentivizing the transition to green energy, it's going to take minimum of 18 to 24 months for that to be realized. So that eats into, even when government is trying to push a policy direction, it takes a long time for private sector players to realize the impact of these incentives. And when change of government happens, that means there will never be a time that those direction or those policy direction is ever realized. So that's one of the huge issues we face. So it also impacts in terms of conversation with investors, knowing that this is how the environment or the terrain policies are, or how long it takes for policies to be implemented. They will tell you that you have to wait till it is fully realized before we can commit any sort of resources or capital into your company. And so that's some of the impacts we face as a private sector player in this space.
Yeah. Great. Thank you so much for laying out some of the more practical aspects and challenges of accessing these incentives. And maybe I'll segue now to Matthew. Um, South Africa is a great example of where some level of maturity on the manufacturing side has come about. And recently, the South African Renewable Energy Master Plan was approved, which I believe includes a strong component on developing those local value chains and bringing up incentives to address that. We'd love to hear from you, on how the SEZ framework, or specifically the Atlantis Green Tech SEZ that you're leading, advances sort of South Africa's wider strategy to catalyze domestic manufacturing and emerge as an export hub, regionally or globally. But also sort of broadly how sort of these SEZ frameworks or customs control areas as a trade policy instrument can play an important role in attracting investments in green manufacturing. Matt, over to you.
Yeah, thanks very much. Thanks, Divyam. And it was listening to Loving and the some of the challenges that they're facing with the implementation of policy and the certainty of policy around some of those vehicles. So much of it, I kind of found myself nodding my head and saying, yes, I can see that. So I think there's this tension that we have between the sort of ideal of what we know we need to put into place and to strive for, versus the reality of then what often happens on the ground and is actually being struggled with on the ground. So you mentioned, Sarum, the South African Renewable Energy Master Plan. That is in a draft form. It is rightly, I think, a very solid document. It has taken a value chain approach to looking at opportunities, particularly in the solar and the wind energy sectors. So, and Clovis's look at those value chains is very interesting. So what Sarum has done, for example, is that it's looked at the solar panel manufacturing value chain, and it's looked at what components of those value chains exist in South Africa and could be supported with minimal intervention, versus those areas where quite serious intervention would be required in order to get us fully able to competitively produce solar panels. So there are already companies in South Africa manufacturing solar panels, but obviously it's very, very difficult. In fact, it's impossible to compete with the landed cost or the imported cost of panels coming out of China. And this is perhaps one of the biggest challenges, and I'll bring it back to the concept of SEZs shortly. But when back in the sort of 2010s, 2011s, when South Africa opened up their renewable energy independent power producer program, or the REAP program, and they identified how much solar and wind that they wanted to purchase in the integrated resource plan through these bid windows, The first two bid windows went incredibly successfully, and I think around the world, this independent power purchase methodology was seen as a huge success. There was a huge amount of confidence that was built up in terms of how those two rounds were developed. And as a result, a lot of manufacturers looking at future rounds, because they were already predicting rounds 5 and 6 at that stage. A lot of manufacturers looked at this. They looked at the policy certainty that was emerging. They looked at the size of the market that was potentially emerging. And they started making plans to actually build plant in South Africa. What then happened is that that whole program went kind of onto the back burners in about 2013. And all that initiative to drive that local manufacturing and for foreign OEMs to come in and start manufacturing suddenly dissipated. Suddenly there was concern, there was a questioning of the certainty, there was a questioning of the commitment to the policy, and at the same time, some of the localization targets that had been set in the first two rounds also were being questioned and challenged. Fast forward to 2-3 years ago, when we started having the very widespread load shedding or blackouts in South Africa, and President Ramaphosa then dropped the cap on private installation of wind and solar. And the private sector then started, so before it was public sector, started investing massively in renewable energy. But then all the localization goals were dropped because now we were in a crisis and we had to get the stuff in. We hadn't used the intervening years to build up any local manufacturing capability, or limited. And then everything just was imported, and it's runs to tens of billions of dollars worth of imports of solar and some wind technology over the last year and a half, with a massive increase in renewable energy investment by the private sector over the past few years. And all that energy has been lost through what essentially amounts to a moving around of policy targets, policy uncertainty, and not really sticking to the guns in terms of a framework that has set up. SARAM has now come in, and it's kind of re-looking to kind of do a bit of a reset on some of these trade policies to give them more certainty and give the market more confidence. But as I noted earlier, that is still a draft. It hasn't been implemented, and it does see a place for special economic zones in that policy. I'm going to leave it there for now. I'll come back maybe in a little bit more detail later, just to talk about, if there's a time, to talk a little bit more specifically about the role of special economic zones, specifically in that context.
Thank you, Matt, for laying that out so clearly. And I think what it also shows from South Africa's experience is that an comprehensive or a holistic industrial policy package has to look at all of these different elements together with a long-term framing and stability in mind, whether it's demand creation through local content requirements, through public procurement programs, and then looking at the industrial around the incentives to ensure there is competitiveness and sector protection as those sectors are developed. And this is not a multi-year process; it's almost a decade-long process in some ways to ensure that the local industry can be fostered. And we'll definitely come back to you on the specific role of SEZs. Maybe I'll just sort of turn now to Dr. Suleimani Abdullah from UNECA. Um, just sticking on the point of SEZs, we are now starting to see the development also of transboundary SEZs. One example is the DRC Zambia battery and electric vehicle industry, which leverages on which is an example of how you can leverage on critical mineral resources that exist within a sub-region, as well as different capabilities. What are some of the lessons that are emerging from such transboundary initiatives, and how can these be scaled across other regions or sub-regions across the continent? And what are some of the policy enablers for that?
Yeah, thank you, Divya. And good morning or good afternoon to all the audience. So I'm really pleased to be here and part of this conversation. Representing the United Nations Economic Commission for Africa. And this topic is of critical importance for us, particularly coming at this juncture where the African continental free trade area is being implemented, because this is the ground that will allow a lot of things to happen, including, furthering cooperation among fellow African countries in terms of some of the key elements of Africa's structural transformation and development, notably, engaging into the industrial revolution and greening the industrialization process as well. Because the AFCFTA, actually, the Continental Free Trade Area, can be used as a tool for reducing emission and building sustainable industrialization. By eliminating tariffs on environmental goods, services, and technology. And let me also highlight the protocol on investment that was actually adopted last year in February 2023, is one of the few existing binding legal framework that address actually climate change and environmental consideration directly within its text. So that's to say that there are some of the key elements that are really pushing toward greening industrialization on the continent. And coming now to specifically to your question, and talking about the initiative that is ongoing between the DRC and Zambia. This is happening, the battery and electric value chain initiative. Actually, it comes in the wake of a global transition toward a decarbonized world and renewable energy. So this shift actually is being powered by critical and strategic minerals, which Zambia and DRC possesses actually in large amounts. So we want to move from the traditional way of doing things, actually, instead of just keep African countries as exporter of raw commodity, to move along the value chain, because it's feasible. It's feasible. Why? Because you already have the materials among these two countries, DRC and Zambia, vast reserve of copper in Zambia, lithium and other critical minerals that are also in vast quantities, proven reserves in DRC. So the technology also is accessible. It's not like the old fashioned way of trying to catch up in terms of industrialization, which has proven very, very much challenging. Now the process of greening the industrialization and jumping the bandwagon of green energy is unfolding before us, and most of the countries actually are at the more or less the same level, because of the nature of the technology that can be easily made available to all of these countries. So these two countries, DRC and Zambia, clearly understand the mutual benefit that they will gain in terms of putting together their resources and developing the battery and electric value chain, because worldwide there's a huge trend actually going, and you can see, from the valuation of firms like Tesla, which in less than a decade actually became the top manufacturer of of cars worldwide in terms of valuation, and you can see others also trying to catch up. So this is clearly an indication that the future of mobility will lies within the electrical vehicles. So being part of this, these two countries with the assistance from UNECA and Afrexim Bank actually conducted a feasibility study whereby we selected ARISE. ARISE is well known in terms of the special economic zone development across the continent. So ARISE conducted a feasibility study, and this study has been validated. There is a strong commitment at the highest level, actually, from both sides. At the presidential committee on electric value chain was set up in DRC, as well as in Zambia. A high-level technical committee was also put in place to try to conduct all the investigation and due diligence that are needed for this to happen. And countries are also at the same time called upon, and these countries clearly indicated that they are ready to welcome actually additional countries that will like to join the initiatives. Actually, at this stage where we are talking, already 500 hectares were already identified in DRC to host this special economic zone. And in Zambia also the process was conducted, and land is being secured for this initiative to take off. So I may stop here and can come back later with more details. Over to you, Divya.
Thank you so much, Dr. Abdullah, and we'll certainly come back, on further details on that. Maybe I'll turn to Teniola next from the Africa Policy Research Institute, particularly on, as Dr. Abdullah mentioned, a lot of efforts that are underway, both with the African Continental Free Trade Area, but also with the regional economic communities to help and facilitate, greater intra-Africa trade. So curious to hear from your perspective on how these regional integration efforts can be leveraged to support the development of regional supply chains, particularly for energy transition solutions, whether those are solar modules or batteries or electric vehicles that focus on local value addition.
Thank you. My connection is quite bad, but I hope you can hear me and see me.
Yes, we can hear you for now, yeah.
Yes, I hope it stays stable. Also, apologies, there's some action going on close by. I mean, first of all, I think a point that has already been raised here is the fact that renewable energy sits in a very interesting position. So earlier this year at the World Economic Forum, there was the launch of the Global Risks Report. And one of the risks that was identified was quite interesting. So it was conceptualized as the end of development. And what they were trying to say there was that developing economies may begin to see even less investment flows coming in our direction because of a couple of reasons. And two of those reasons was, first of all, the growing technological gaps between developing economies and some developed economies. Another reason was climate change issues. So the fact that there's the estimates for the needed climate finance for developing countries to begin to meet climate mitigation and adaptation needs may not actually be realized. And I think renewable energy sits in between these two because you have, first of all, technology on one side as a green technology, but also climate mitigation adaptation on the other side. So that's why they're very crucial. And the AFCFT does recognize this, as the previous speaker said. So the AFCFT has prioritized automotive value chains as one of the important value chains for development within the continent. So, and these are value chains that have been prioritized. It's just about 8 to 10 of them that will see increased support and facilitation for the growth of those industries. There's a question of how this can happen. I mean, I like that the previous speaker mentioned the investment protocol, and I think I'd like to even zero in on the investment protocol really, because we're talking about, again, value chains, and we're talking about industries that to an extent are nascent in many African economies, right? So they're not huge yet. And when we talk about the size of the industries, it's not just about the size of production, but also the size of the addressable market. So the AFCFTA on one side tries to solve the market's issue by saying, oh, Africa is going to be a single market. You can get your production anywhere, and then you should be able to access the rest of the market at gradually reduced tariffs, as was raised by, I think, one of the first few speakers. But then on the other side, there's question, and the renewable energy projects can be quite large scale. And to really embark on some of these projects was not very strong for some African markets. But then with the value chain approach, it's now possible for a couple of African
Sorry, Daniela, you're breaking up slightly.
That have been identified.
Can you hear us?
Can you hear me?
Yes, yes. Can you, maybe if you can stop your video, that
No?
might help free up the bandwidth.
I can hear you, yes.
Yes, can you maybe stop your video? That
Let
might
me-
help free up some bandwidth.
Okay, can you hear me now?
Yes, we can hear you now.
Okay. I think
Can you hear us?
yes, I can. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you now, but it's quite patchy. Maybe continue for a bit, and if we find there's a challenge, we might come back to you. Okay, maybe we'll circle back to Teniola. And maybe I'll move next to Dr. Fenwick's Musonye. We very often talk about the focus is usually on commodities and merchandise trade. One of the challenges we often hear is always the issue of the lack of sufficient demand, the market scale, and the lack of demand aggregation instruments. Now, of course, one way to trigger that is through energy generation projects or energy projects that are, regional in nature, and enabling trade, not just of commodities, but also of electricity that unlocks scale and potentially demand for local products. Dr. Musonye, we'd love to hear from you in terms of what trade-related gaps that you see have so far hindered the full development of regional power pools in Africa, but also how we can develop regional infrastructure that can be accelerated to strengthen electricity supply that supports local industrial development, which is a key input.
Thank you very much. I hope you're hearing me.
Yes, we can hear you loud and clear.
Yeah. First, maybe we talk from the point of the demand itself. The World Bank SDG monitoring report came out, I think, this year, and shows that around 600 million Africans do not have access to electricity. That's around 42% of the population. So that's one point we need to start from. The number two, we look at the issue of distribution of the generation resources, because you see the way Africa is situated, you find some countries have excess electricity generation, others have less. And the generation does not necessarily link to access because of the issue of infrastructure. First, of course, national infrastructure within a country, then intercontinental infrastructure. So one of the things one would have to look at in terms of trying to improve access, and in terms of actually to improve the trade in energy is the power pools, which have not been working very well, regional power pools. The South African power pool works nicely, but the others are still doing some work which has not been completed. So, and one of the things probably one might want to look at in terms of why is this not complete. If you look like is the Kenyan and Tanzanian line that's being constructed, you find one country has finished their construction, the other country has not finished the construction. This brings me to the issue of the procurement laws, which affect the energy infrastructure or just the energy market in totality. When you find most of the energy projects in African countries are most related to government, and government laws are a bit stringent, they're a bit difficult to hack sometimes, of course. So there should be need to relook at the laws, the procurement laws, just to ensure that it's a bit easier to procure any project that one wants to do. In Tanzania, it's easy to do a project for energy than in Kenya because of the land laws. So the land laws that are related to energy infrastructure are supposed to be a bit lax. In Kenya, the Minister of Land changed this recently. So you may not pay for way leaves when you're constructing your line, but it used to be a bit of a problem actually in the past. So, but what would you want to look at, or what would you want to do to improve local manufacturing, even just for span across? I would look at this in three terms. One is in terms of trading with the neighbors. Then number two is in terms of the finance. Then number three is in technical capacity. Trading with neighbors is a pretty, you look at the thing in terms of standardization. You know, we have a variety of standards, standardization in terms of even products across the continent. So sometimes when I'm walking from here to Rwanda, I need to carry my own charger. When I'm going to Namibia, a different charger and all that. So it applies also to the products that we are using, maybe to do local manufacturing or even generating energy. And you'd find that a company that has its roots in, let's say, a different country, in Nigeria, Cameroon, Kenya, South Africa, has to apply different standards even to do the projects they're going to do. So that has to really come in very nicely. The standards are supposed at least to be harmonized. We talk of the harmonization of regional standards to enable trade. That would be interesting. Then, of course, the issue of the customs union. Customs union also has to work well in terms of what the levies one charges at the border. I think should go the way the European Union, where you have a common customs union to improve what you bring into your countries, so that you can also leverage. It's what you call the comparative advantage in economics. That it's not necessary that when Kenya is working in maybe hydrogen or batteries, it's not necessary that Uganda does the same. They can do something else, then you do cross-border trading. But that can only be possible if the trade barriers have been removed in terms of the taxes, or just moving from Kenya to Uganda. Open borders could be good in terms of trade for that. Then the money transfer. You know, it could also be very difficult to transfer money when you're doing business from one country to another, because different countries have also different banking laws in terms of transferring money, which might become a bit of increase what you call the transaction costs in doing the business. So for us to really manage each country to manage its domestic affairs well, it has to be able to trade with the neighbors well, because of the comparative enable using the banking laws. Then, of course, we're looking at the issue of finance. Most of the solar projects I know that are mostly even in Kenya are mostly financed abroad. They're financed by banks from Europe mostly, and sometimes Asia, yes. But then local banking industry does not really take part in this financing. Where now the government has to come in terms of guarantees, because the local banks, they have the issue, they are risk averse. So they go to easier to win projects than going to projects that probably may not be well be aware of in terms of the risks. So there is need, of course, even as policies are developed, to specifically target the banking industry in terms of improving the awareness and, of course, giving them guarantees, the government guarantees, so that they can also come into the field and they try to influence the manufacturing or the renewable energy manufacturing business in the country. We would look at, there are these people called facilitators. They stand in between the banking industry and the beneficiaries. So facilitators come in and now give this assurance as they can do the risk modeling and everything to ensure that the banks understand the renewable energy industry well, and that the renewable energy industry understands all the banking sector well, to reduce the transaction costs and, of course, to reduce the risk profile of the projects, or the way the banks profile the risk of the projects, so that they can be amenable to issuing loans or financing the projects. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much for laying out so clearly on the standardization harmonization side, also on the technical capacity gaps and on the finance side, and that's a good segue to the next session. For the next round of questions, I now hand over to Lolade.
Thank you very much, Divyam, and thank you to all our speakers so far. I think this has been extremely insightful. And just to pick up on the last few comments from Dr. Musoni, I just thought it was really interesting to see how it is important that we reduce the barriers to cooperation across countries in Africa in order to really kind of give ourselves the opportunity to trade cross-country and to reduce some of those issues. I mean, if you look at something as basic as the sort of plugs that you use, and understanding the banking laws and seeing how we actually move money, if we can find more similarities across the continent, I think definitely that will help us in supporting sort of boundary cross-country trade and the likes. So thank you so much for that. We'll now pivot slightly to address the trade finance question. And we're pleased to have with us here Ms. Sylvia Moara from GreenMax Capital Advisors. So Sylvia, trade financing is an important enabler for local enterprises that are importing components or finished products. And are usually sort of working capital constrained. I think we hear a lot of that, especially in our discussions with companies that we're trying to support. How is GreenMax Africa addressing the issue for the e-mobility sector in Africa through its partnership with Tradable House Africa? And what are some of the challenges and learnings that have emerged from the implementation phase?
Okay, thank you for the opportunity. One of the key things that we realized and what led to us setting up Green Shift Africa, well, the key challenges that are faced by especially the e-mobility companies, being the fact that most of them are still in their very nascent stages. And one of the key things that came up was the limited capital, where most of these e-mobility companies are not, as much as they have the brilliant ideas, they have the business plans, they're lacking they have the capital constraints that would enable them to grow from an operation or even a capex point of view. Similarly, that being that most of these e-mobility companies are importing their products, especially from China and India and all the other countries. And because they have not built trade finance they have not built trade working relationships with these countries, what is then happening is they're being required to pay like a 30% deposit on ordering and 70% before shipment. So this means that by the time the product is getting to the port, they are being required to have made 100% payment, of which even when they sell now to their buyers, the buyers may ask either for extended credit terms or even for them to actually now sell to the market that now is now warming up to e-mobility. It then becomes a cash flow challenge that comes into their space. So in terms of sorting out that and realizing that also even with the length of from ordering to importation to delivery, it takes about 6 to 12 months. So that's what brought us up to decide to start the Green Shift Africa, partnering with our partners at Tradable House. Tradable House is they're trade experts who work in turn, who facilitate both intra and both trade in Africa and also without Africa and also outside Africa, where they help in sourcing, aggregating, and everything. They've worked with various products, including even in the renewable energy products, raw materials, commodities. And that's why we felt that they were our best fit to come in as our financial supporters. So in terms of the solutions that we bring in one to support these companies to get leveraged capital, whereby based on the amount you have, we are able to come in and leverage what you can get so that it then now helps you now work, at least bring in more products, also enjoy the economies of scale due to large products, and also help you meet the demand that's being requested for in the market. it also helps you get deferred payment terms, so that then now, because with Tradable coming in, they come in and act as your importer. And what we then do is they will be able to manage, they'll help you manage your cash flow, that instead of you being required to make 100% upfront payment, or even within the 6 to 12 months, you can get a facility that actually goes to up to almost 9 to 12 months, so as to allow you to even trade and sell these products. Still under the Green Shift Africa, we are working to get on board third-party guarantee support, where we'll be able to enable this trade. Because one of my key things is for Tradable Africa, in some of their trade systems, they may require like a letter of credit, because they cannot charge the properties. So they'll ask for a letter of credit, maybe payable within 12 months. And now to support that, being that these companies are not able to get the financial support they're getting from the banks, is we are getting on board third-party guarantee support, who will come in and give a guarantee to enable this trade to take place. During the implementation, of course, some of the things that we have experienced, which have been good learnings, is we realized most of the companies are nascent with minimal turnovers, that even when you introduce them to the bank, the costs, because of their minimal transactions, their minimal even operations, they are not able to actually secure some of these letter of credits. Even when we go to what we call private sector funding, they feel that the company is still at a very small stage for them to benefit from the same. And now this then now makes that even when we come in to give them like any product, we'll see that for some of them, the cost might not make sense. It might be a bit high, even when we try and get everybody else on board. Similarly, we've seen a lot of reluctance, and I'm happy that Dr. Msonya has come in and mentioned the support from the financial institutions. Is the financial institutions operate on strict prudential guidelines, strict regulatory guidelines. So then this now becomes a challenge when you're bringing to them a new product that is not hard. They speak a number of the discussions that are done on the renewable energy sector, including in the e-mobility sector, is they ask the companies, it's done at the macro level, where it's the president, it's the Minister of Finance, Minister of Energy. But the question we ask is, how does that then trickle towards the banking sector, to the regulator? Can it, and maybe one of the recommendations we are saying across the renewable energy sector is, can renewable energy sector in the African markets become like a priority sector, so that banks can stop comparing it to your traditional trade systems, to give them, like now for an e-mobility, even for you to access an e-mobility facility, you're being evaluated the same way they would evaluate a normal vehicle asset finance, which has proven itself in the market. So they'll still give you up to 3 years to pay that e-mobility. So then it becomes a challenge for most people to even afford. And similarly, even for these new companies who are trying to bring in these products, they are being told, no, you need to have minimum turnovers of X amount. Yet the market has not been able to be friendly enough to give them. So these are the things that then now are coming as learning points, and also even for the banks, because they don't understand renewable energy financing. They don't understand how to even perform due diligence on these companies, what to look out for, how to understand the various business models, not only in the e-mobility, in the battery infrastructure across the board, and how well can they integrate them into the normal financing policy. So there is that need for the technical capacity training, not only for the e-mobility companies to help them and from a financial capability perspective, but even from the banks to be able to understand this some of these structures. And this now comes, and that's where the strategic partnerships come in, that who else can come in on board? We can be able to support doing the technical capacity training. We can support on all that, but then now this comes in at a cost. So who's able to come in and support to build that technical capacity amongst the financial players, to also appreciate that even as we come in as aggregators, we are coming in to bring in a solution, because we've seen it work in one or two countries where we've started rolling out the products, but in others the uptake is very slow, and even the sign up for banks working with aggregators is not a very easy process. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you so much, Sylvia. I think, so many sort of salient, fantastic points. And it's such a nice sort of segue tying in what Dr. Musonye was talking about the need to really educate the financiers in order to get them to participate. And you more or less highlighting the fact that there is a lack of technical understanding, which essentially is increasing, the risk profile of a lot of these, very young, nascent companies, which effectively is affecting the growth of that market. Just a couple of follow-on questions. I'm just interested to know sort of how many companies have you been able to support through, Green Shift, and whether or not, and which countries are you actively sort of working? Because I'm sure the work that you provide will definitely, come a long way to some countries that are also trying to kind of scale up the uptake of renewable energy technologies. So it'll be interesting to just hear a little bit more about that from you. Thank you.
Okay. In terms of the transactions, we should be closing in at least about 2 or 3 transactions now, because the due diligence and the uptake was a bit of a challenge. But areas we've gotten good reception is some countries. Kenya has been one of them. Nigeria, Rwanda have also come in very strong. And this is not only on the four-wheeler space, but also on the two-wheelers, as well as the battery charging and infrastructure system. Although the battery charging is taking a bit slower because a number of their products are locally assembled, and even the economics of the battery, at least the managing the battery, especially for those who are doing swapping as a service, it means that your payments will be required more than 1 year, and trade finance does not go more than 1 year. So unless we are able to get a longer term debt facilitator who can convert that to a loan, unfortunately, we can't really go into the battery sector. But however, we are open to various countries. We are looking into Ghana, Benin, and also Ghana, Benin, Uganda, Tanzania, and basically any place that we are able to get, because as long as we are able to get a good local financial institution that can support, and also an e-mobility company that wants to look at that, we come in and support, because in that we also come in with our transactional advisory services on behalf of the e-mobility company and on behalf of the financial institution.
Thank you so much, Sylvia. So on the topic of sort of working with companies within the private sector, I'd like to return to Loving from Solar Taxi. So based on your experience and given the growth ambitions of Solar Taxi, how do you think trade financing facilities such as Green Shift can be effectively designed to support domestic manufacturers of EVs?
To be honest, we've been in discussion with quite a number of financial institutions to just get us a letter of credit for us to be able to use that or leverage on that to bring in some parts for assembly. And in Ghana, for instance, even to be able to get access to a letter of credit, the demand in terms of collateralization, having to be able to put up about 25-30% in terms of capital or cash guarantee, the requirement through the central banks to be able to access just letter of credit and to facilitate trade financing it's a bit hectic. So for instance, we got a project with one of the largest bars, that's the intercity bus company in Ghana called the STC, to deliver about 150 buses to them. And as we speak, we are still engaging financial institutions to be able to help us get access to at least a letter of credit. But for a deal which is about 10 million USD, they're asking us to at least cost minimum of about $2 to $3 million. And so for us to just be able to complete some of these projects, and these are projects that already have guarantees on it, already have off-takers on it, there isn't any sort of issues around the deal in itself. But then the requirement alone can push us or can set us back about a year, because then now we need to go to equity individuals to give us cash just to come and guarantee for us to be able to access the letter of credit. So the challenge is it's helpful if it's just on smaller quantity in terms of product. But then if you want to really scale, it becomes a bit more difficult, because then the requirement becomes higher and higher. And then that affects us to be able to access some of this financing for us to be able to deliver.
Thank you so much, Loving. And I think the beauty of having the private sector actually give their on-ground experience is to really understand what the issues are with the implementation, and to really be able to come together and come up with solutions that effectively will enable scale up of manufacturing of these renewable energy technologies. So I'm going to turn back to you, Sylvia. So as companies such as Solar Taxi, they speak about scaling their local manufacturing ambitions and onward to greater backward integration. How will trade financing need to evolve to meet the changing challenges of the sector? I mean, I think you touched upon this, initially, and just wanting to look to see, is there a role for development finance institutions, and how can they play in enabling trade financing models such as Green Shift Africa to be deployed at scale? Because really the scale is what we need to have, and we want to know how can we get there and who can we use and work with to get there. Over.
Okay. I think in terms of the strategies for development financial institutions, I think one is to support most of these companies, both in debt and equity financing. And that's first for the mobility companies. But even for us, we are looking for a number of players who can come in on board and also help us provide cheaper debt. Because you see, at the end of it, you don't want to be giving out a product where you're doing double digits interest rates. You want it as cheap as possible, as reasonable as possible, to enable also these people to sell at a reason, because the higher the cost of debt, the higher the amount it is. So for one, the first, as we are looking at, is equity and debt financing. Similarly, we also open, especially as Green Shift Africa, is to get guarantees and risk-sharing mechanisms from private investors, people who are ready to come in and support on the third-party guaranteeing, so as to for us to enable our cause towards the commercial banks and help them now encourage their participation in this sector. From technical assistance and capacity building, we are looking for people who would support us as Green Shift and also as GreenMax as a whole, to support this in terms of training programs, sensitization, due diligence, and advisory services for both the banks and the e-mobility sector. So this is to support in technical, through technical assistance and capacity building support. Then similarly is also to look at various blended finance structures, see how we can be able to structure, because very many people, there are people who have philanthropic funds and they don't know how to use these funds. We are able to help them structure and see how to get into the e-mobility space. And we can always design in terms of, because we are not cast on stone on this one form of trade finance model, but we can come in and show that then this is how you'll come in, this is the level you'll get if you give us a concessional loan, this is your return on investment. Do you want to be fully in it as a project finance, or do you want to be in it just as just like a funder? So those are things that we would need the support. And as I've also said, from a policy and enabling environment, is to look at the regulatory support that will encourage especially the financial institutions to come in and play a role in encouraging most of these players across Africa. Yeah, thanks.
Thank you so much, Sylvia, for that. Our colleague, our speaker, Matt, unfortunately has to step off, but I think we'll get back to him at another time to speak on SEZs and their roles. So I think I'll turn to Dr. Suleimani. So picking up on the experience shared, by Matt previously from South Africa, what opportunities do you see for South-South cooperation an exchange on trade partnership development, as well as policy design. How do you think programs such as the Africa Renewable Energy Manufacturing Initiative can support such South-South cooperation?
Yeah, thank you, Lolade. I think we should be clear that there is a scope and a lot of interest actually for South-South cooperation, because we don't have actually to reinvent the wheel. So wherever there are successful experiences, and there are a lot actually going on, we need to find a way to adopt them, to transpose them into the local realities of the countries on the continent. So a lot is going on. It's good that we get the facts about the experiences from the countries in the global south. And I'm sure that pretty much we are talking about the manufacturer of electric vehicle batteries, but this has already started in a lot of parts of the world. So let's see how it was it's engineered, and let's also put in place the training, the vocational centers that we'll make sure we'll prepare our people to be ready actually and to participate in the process of this manufacturing process, because that's actually where lies most of the value. So we need to create more value addition, because that's where we get the jobs. And you know, the experience that I've already presented regarding what's going on between the Zambia and DRC, I think it's something that should be taken to another level, to have more countries actually participating to this value chain, and also to initiate, to stimulate and emulate actually experiences in other regions of the continent. It can happen in the north of the continent, it can happen in West Africa and other parts of the continent. So let's be open and learn from each other, and I think this is the way forward. It's something that has a huge potential, but let's make sure that we can reap the benefit, we can get the fruits of the various initiatives that we are undertaking right now. That's it. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dr. Abdullah. And I like the fact that you speak to learnings, not just, you know, internationally in South-South cooperation, but also from Africa and other regions. I think sometimes when we discuss opportunities to learn, we always just maybe sometimes focus internationally, but there's a lot that we can learn from each other on continent, and we'll definitely be picking up on that with you later on. So finally, I'll move on to Teniola. So access to reliable and up-to-date trade data still remains a key challenge, especially when existing trade codes do not adequately capture evolving technologies and products, including renewables, batteries, and electric vehicles. How do you think trade data framework, how can the trade data framework be better strengthened to better inform decisions on value chain development from minerals to finished products?
Thank you. Can you hear me now? Hopefully it stays stable. I mean, for this question, I don't think it's a challenge that is only facing African or other developing countries. It's really a global challenge at the moment, because things are changing very fast, and I would say the data is not changing along with it. From the African perspective, or from the developing world perspective, I think a bottom-up approach may be required. So in this sense, understanding really what renewable energy technologies mean here as a subset of the wider green technologies. And the reason why I think a bottom-up approach will be great is because there is an aspect of indigenous green technologies, or indigenous, renewable technologies that are beginning to re-emerge as potential solutions to some of these challenges that we're trying to address. So a bottom-up approach where we properly catalog and understand what it looks like from our perspective, and then we start to translate that into whether it's tariff lines or whether it's just product groupings, so that you can properly apply trade facilitation or promotion measures and, increasingly link the different value chains continentally. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you so much, Tanya. I'll hand over to my colleague Divyam now for a Q&A that we may have in the chat. Thank you.
Thanks, Lalade. Almost out of time, but perhaps this question on the Africa Continental Free Trade Area Protocol on Investment. Could you please highlight some of the main challenges about the protocol? Tenny, maybe we can trust you to answer that.
All right. I mean, I like to see things from the opportunities perspective, but maybe starting with the question, the challenges. So the protocol on investment also provides for the creation of a new agency called the Pan-African Trade and Investment Agency that is supposed to serve as almost a continental IPA. So that's like an Africa-wide investment promotion agency, and needs to more or less coordinate the different countries to promote investments in the different sectors. And now we're talking about renewable energy together. But of course, this doesn't always work as specified, because you're talking about coordinating 54 different investments, promotion, agencies within the different countries. You're talking about coordinating 54 different investment policies, 54 different industrial policies, priority sectors, and that's easier said than done. But the opportunity that I see there is that it's really about the fact that some of our production structures are complementary, and it's about highlighting the complementarities that do exist. Again, it has to be a bottom-up approach. It can't come from the top down. So countries have their industrial policies, they have their investment policies, they have their trade policies, and it's really to look at them, first of all, sub-regionally and then continentally, and to see who links where. If you look at automotive investments, whether it's renewable energy, whether it's electric vehicles, right? There are some capacities that exist at the moment within some countries. So the continental objective is then to point out to them that, oh, there's 3 countries. If you come together, you're going to be stronger as far as this value chain is concerned, instead of competing with each other. So yeah, some challenges with coordination, but then I think there are opportunities as well.
Thank you so much. Maybe we'll take one last question. Maybe I can look to Dr. Abdullah to answer this one. Can panelists comment on how they see practical steps and timeline of EV batteries manufacturing value chain to bring closer to critical minerals? Perhaps, if there's a timeline for the DRC, Zambia, ICZ could directly answer to this question.
Yeah, well, actually, the feasibility study has just been completed, as I mentioned, by Arise Group, which was selected as the contractor to investigate this the approach and to choose the best approach. So there is a ongoing exchange and discussions among the various stakeholders to finalize. So it's only after finalization of this validation study that will be in a position to understand clearly in terms of the timelines, the major steps that needs to be undertaken. But the commitment, what is great is the commitment is the highest level. I mean, it's almost like on a daily basis that the president in DRC is following up on this matter, and he set up also, a board, a battery board in DRC that is reporting directly to him, and that is monitoring all the steps. So I can assure you that this is something that is really moving forward and moving in the right direction. Let's say in the next couple of years, we'll be in a position really to see things more concretely happening on the ground.
Thank you so much, Dr. Abdullah, for those.
I mean, this document, when finalized, they will be made publicly available. So it will be an information that will be, brought to all potential investors that want to engage into this this business of electric vehicle battery value chain. Yeah,
that
over
would
to
be
you.
a great
Thank you.
resource. We can also add it to our Africa Renewable Energy Manufacturing Initiative resource page. And there's a final question from Alina on hydrogen and ammonia tech manufacturing in Africa. So Africa REMI program itself focuses on solar batteries and electric mobility, but there are other studies that have been undertaken. I've left the website link in the chat. Please reach out and we can share resources that address these technologies. So with that, we're quite delayed, but thank you so much to all the panelists and the attendees for your insights and for the discussions and questions. This is the second webinar in the South-South Virtual Policy Dialogue series that we organize. We'll be organizing many more moving forward, and we'll keep everyone updated and posted through a newsletter. So thank you very much for your time and for the discussion and insights, and looking forward to continuing this dialogue on this important topic. Thank you.